Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, everyone. This is Stephanie from Archive Social, and welcome to our webinar on how to improve crisis communications through partnerships. We're going to be getting started in just a few minutes.
Hello, can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Hello.
you, and we're going to get started in just a minute.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome again. This is Stephanie Hawkins at Archive Social, and let's go ahead and get started. So welcome, everyone, to our webinar today on how to improve crisis communications through partnerships. We have a great webinar planned today. I'm really excited about it. So just to start off with a quick housekeeping slide, if we can advance the slide here. Okay, go back one. And just to start off, all attendees are on mute. Feel free to use the question function to submit questions. There will be time for a Q&A throughout the presentation, and the webinar is being recorded. So you will receive a copy via email. There will be a time for Q&A throughout the presentation, so please send your questions through and I can try and flag them and try and work through them throughout the presentation. So if we don't get to them during the presentation, we'll do our best to get to them after. And in just a minute, we are going to have a slide deck up for you to show. We're just having a little bit of a technical difficulty here. All right, great. So for those of you joining us today, our guest is Natalie French from the Doral, Florida Police Department. And for those of you who don't know much about the Doral PD, we're going to start off with just a quick poll to get you a little bit more acquainted with it. So you're going to see the poll question appear on your screen, and we're hoping that you'll all vote. And the question here is, which celebrity is a sworn member of the Doral Police Department? And you'll see those three answers there. And I see everybody's answers coming in. People changing their minds and coming to conclusion. Okay. And here we are. We've got the answers showing up as 71% of you think it's Shaq, We've got 7% of you thinking that Jennifer Lopez is part of the department, and 21% for Emilio Estefan. All right, so we are going to find out the answer to that in just a minute, but before we do, let's talk a little bit more about our guest today. Now, as I mentioned, our guest is Natalie French, and she is the Media and Emergency Management Specialist for the Doral Police Department. And Natalie has over 25 years of experience in the media and communications world. Before coming to the world of government communications, she actually worked in television as a producer, covering some very interesting stories, which I know she's going to talk a little bit about. And when I first reached out to her, actually, she had some interesting stories to tell about covering Hurricane Irma and the Zika crisis. And we had a really great conversation about how she leveraged a really diverse set of partnerships with other public sector organizations and the media and private companies, and just to better serve her community during times of crisis. So, Natalie, we are really excited to have you here today. And with that said, welcome.
Thank you very
Natalie,
much for having me. Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good. I'm glad that we were able to connect.
Yes, me too. Thanks so much for being here. And I think we're working on getting the slide deck up. We're having a little bit of a technical problem here, but I think we can go ahead and get started just with our conversation, and we can move on and bring the slides up whenever they're ready. Sound good?
All right. Sounds perfect.
Okay, great. Perfect. So I think the first thing we want to know before we dig into the details is, what is the answer to our question? So which celebrity is a member of the Doral PD?
Well, most of you got it right. It's Mr. Jacques O'Neill. He's one of our detectives. So yes, he's very cool. He's been around for several years. He also is a sworn member at Miami Beach Police. So, and the main reason I believe he wanted to do that is because he has members of his family who are also law enforcement members. So this is something that runs deep in his family and in his DNA. So we're very happy to have somebody like Shaq as part of our team, and as someone that used to work for the media. It's great to have his image out there to help us with our public relations efforts.
Definitely, that is very cool. And maybe after this, we can get J-Lo and Emilio Estefan on board as well.
Yes, that wouldn't be a bad idea.
Well, I know that you're going to start off by talking a little bit about yourself and about your history, and maybe you can kind of dig into a little of those things before we get into our topic for today.
Sure. I'm a graduate from my university in Caracas, Venezuela. I was born in Caracas. My father is an American from Connecticut. I used to call him my good old Yankee dad. My mom is Venezuelan, and we moved to California in the 70s. And then I went back to Venezuela, got my degree, and then came back in the 90s. My first assignment was actually with the first Iraq war. So I'm dating myself here, but that's fine. And no, I didn't go to Iraq, but I covered it for some Latin American outlets in Washington, D.C. So that was my first. It's not an emergency situation, but it was pretty tough, and that opened the doors for me to work for shows like the Today Show with NBC. I worked for PBS Frontline, which is one of my favorite shows still today, and it did help me, understand how the media world works. And from there, I went to government, the very local government in the city of Miami in 2002, and I fell in love with the job, and I finally got my one of my bucket lists was to get a master's degree, and I got it in emergency management a couple of years ago with American Military University. So it's been a long journey, but I loved every piece of it. I've been lucky enough to cover stories in Cuba when John Paul II, the Pope, went there in 1998. And I did cover a little bit of 9/11, the aftermath of 9/11, and that, I would say, is what prompted me to work for government and to understand how we manage emergencies of that scale, that big scale. How all the pieces come together to be able to recover from from emergencies of that nature. So besides
And it's
that, in my
interesting that you bring that up.
uh-huh.
I was just going to say it's interesting you bring up that, it's so important to have that grand scale because that's kind of the focus of our conversation today about all the different pieces working together.
Correct. And as a fun fact, regretfully I couldn't have kids, but I do have a dog, and please meet Mr. Potter. That's as in Harry Potter. So I didn't call
And we
him
did have
Dumbledore.
a photo we were going to show, but
Yeah,
it's not coming up
you
on
don't
the
have.
screen. But he is a
Oh,
very
that's
cute schnauzer,
yes.
is
He's
he?
a schnauzer. He's a schnauzer, and he's one of our mascots here at the police department. So he wears his mini canine T-shirt once in a while. So yeah,
That's great. Are you able to bring him into work?
well, not in the office, but sometimes I bring it in the morning, and then I drop him off at daycare. But it's a
Doggy
great
daycare.
way of it's a great way of you know it's police work is stressful no matter how you look at it. So having pets come and visit once in a while it helps us kind of like you know bring the stress level a little down. So I like to bring it at least once every other month or so.
Well, great, Natalie. We're really excited to have you on today, and I know that you have a wealth of information to share on the topic of building partnerships with the media and with the public sector, other public sector agencies, and then also with the private sector. And I really want to sort of get into how you've done that and, exactly the steps you might take. But before we do that, we're going to try and launch another poll. We're not quite sure if it's going to work because of some technical issues we're having, but let's see if that will pop up here on the screen. And see if that's working. Okay, here it is. And the poll question is, what are your biggest challenges with developing and leveraging partnerships for your agency? So we're just curious to find out what challenges you face so that we can kind of shape this conversation a little bit more specifically to those of you who are on the call right now. Okay, and it looks like the answers are coming in. Okay, great. So what we've got here is it looks like none of you answered that you're unsure of how to develop new partnerships. So that's great. It sounds like developing new partnerships is not as much of a problem. Looks like 25% of you are a bit unsure how to get more benefit out of your partnerships. 31% unsure how to use partnerships during crisis situations, which that's great. We're going to talk a lot about that specifically with regards to Hurricane Irma, and if we have time with Zika. And then the last question being the lack of time to invest in creating partnerships. That was actually the biggest challenge. So very interesting. Natalie, do you resonate with those answers?
Definitely. What I had coming into the public sector is that sometimes you find gaps, and that's the first thing you usually want to do is to assess what your agency or your city, your municipality has to offer, or they have in place. So once you kind of do that assessment and evaluate what you already have, you find those gaps, and then you work on what you already have, and you improve on you leverage on that partnership that is already in place, and or you create the first steps to create partnerships with other organizations that probably there was not something in place already. So that, and I always like to say that, and as a matter of fact, we just had an after action meeting this morning in Miami-Dade County with a bunch of agencies and municipalities, and we went through the whole Irma experience. And one of the things that everybody kept saying, and we like to keep bringing it to the table, is the fact that government cannot do this alone. It's impossible for agencies and government agencies to handle emergencies, especially of the caliber of Irma, by ourselves. So that's why you need those partnerships in place, and it includes the private sector, the media, NGOs, and it's the community as a whole that needs to be, to be prepared, to respond, to recover, and to mitigate any type of disasters.
Right. Okay, great. Um, so I think we kind of touched a little bit about this, but these next few slides, we were going to talk a little bit about why it's important to develop partnerships. And you just mentioned, government can't do it alone. It's really important to do it together. And I think another kind of nuance of that question is why PIOs? So why the communications person in government, and why not somebody else in terms of who you should be developing these partnerships?
That's a great question. As much of us probably had never gone through a big emergency ourselves, but you never know when it's going to happen. I can assure you that, for example, 2 weeks ago, our neighborhood city of Sweetwater never imagined that they have to handle the collapse of a bridge that was it was almost finished. It collapsed in their city, and they have such a tragedy. 6 people got killed. So you never know when something like that could happen. So in what I learned with emergency management is that the 4 phases of emergency management are basically preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. And all those phases are united by by communications. You communicate how to prepare, you communicate your response, your recovery, and how to mitigate disaster. So that's why, and actually, even universities have realized in the research in the academies and universities all over the world that communications and emergency management are more and more integrated, more than ever. So that's why I think PIOs have such a key function when it comes to emergency management. And that's another thing that it was brought up this morning in our after action meeting, is that when a piece of information is sent out that is not accurate, or give you an example. This is just an example. Let's say we give out information about a shelter opening, and that's not the right shelter. Imagine, the headache that creates. People showing up at a school that they're not supposed to go there, etc., etc. So that's why information is always such a key function of managing an emergency. And that's why we need, personnel that's trained, that know how to massage a message, and to send it out the best way, and the most in the most accurate way possible, using your best tools that you have in hand. So that's why I think PIOs are so key in the emergency management world.
So as a PIO, let's say it's the first day of your job and you're thinking of yourself, okay, I need to create these partnerships. I need to create partnerships with nonprofits. I need to create partnerships with other public sector agencies. I need to create partnerships with media. What are the first steps you take, and what do you do?
When I first came to the Doral Police Department, which, by the way, I always like to say that was a great opportunity that the city gave me as well, because I started on the city administration, and I was reassigned to the police department, which was fantastic, and I'm always very grateful to the team, the whole administration team, and the elected officials for giving me this opportunity to serve the community better. And so the first thing that I did was to assess, what type of partnership we already had in place. Obviously, as a law enforcement agency, most agencies have mutual aid agreements with other cities, other agencies, and I realized that there was probably a little gap with organizations like the Red Cross. As you know, the Red Cross is by Congress is the main NGO that helps government in cases of emergencies. So they're assigned as such by Congress. So I wanted to learn a little more about how can can I strengthen that relationship with them, knowing that as a fact we're gonna need them if something were to happen. So um, thankfully, here in Miami-Dade, we have something called the whole community. It's called whole community meeting. So we have that 4 times a year. We meet at the Emergency Operations Center in the county, and the county uses that platform to invite different I would say uh, roles in when if something were to happen. And one of the people that they invited was a representative from the Red Cross. So what I did was, very simple. I after the presentation, I went up to the person, to have that human connection first, and exchange contact information. And I wanted to, go to her office, meet the personnel that work for the Miami Red Cross, know their offices, and that in itself is your first step, and I always say it's better to start that relationship not the day of a tragedy of the day of an emergency. It's always good to have it beforehand so that you know the person, you know their face, and you know that God forbid something were to happen, you pick up the phone, you call, and they know who you are. So that simple human contact, it's already 50% of your battle is won already when you already have that in place. So that's basically what I did. I and then after that meeting that I had with them, that developed within less than a year into one of the first exercises with the Red Cross that we had in the city at a local park. So they needed to train their shelter managers. So we provided them with a location to train, and that foster more our relationship, and later on with cases like Irma, it was very it was already in place, and we were able to to have them come over, and even though we as an agency do not handle the evacuation centers or the shelters, we already have that relationship with them, and if anything came up and if they needed more security, they just pick up the phone and call us. So that it's always a two-way relationship, and it always helps when you're going crazy with so many things going on at the same time when emergency strikes. So that's basically what I did. Now, of course, I also leverage in relationships that were already in place here at the police department, or that I already had with coming from my private sector experience. So in the case of the media, for example, when I left the media, thankfully it was the time when Facebook and LinkedIn came on board. So I kept those relationships with my former colleagues through social media, and they still know who I am. They know how to contact me. They even have my personal cell number. So that always helps, because at the end of the day, and as I always tell my bosses here, is the media is like is a love hate relationship. We all know that, and we need them, and they need us. And trust me, when an emergency situation happens, we're all going to be on the same boat, because at the end of the day, what we want is to save lives. So I need them as much as they need me to accomplish that objective as fast and as effectively as possible. And that's why I I also took advantage of a great organization here in South Florida called the South Florida Media Coalition, and that coalition helped us meet once a month, and we review the main stories that happened that month in the region, and we go over the experiences, and we share each other's. The reporters are there, producers are there. We share what happened, and our number one the number one thing we always say before we start those meetings is what we say here stays here. That's this between professionals. This is what happened, and this is what's gonna how we're gonna make it work better. So that's basically what you do. You assess what you have, you leverage on what the city already has provided you, what the elected officials have already in place, because they have an amazing way of of knowing everybody in the community and beyond the community. So you take advantage of those relationships that are already in place, and then you foster those, or you start new ones. And the key is to keep it up. It's not just one phone call a year. It's just to continue fostering that relationship with other organizations.
Great. And I know from the poll that we took earlier that people seem really interested in, once you've created these partnerships, how do you go about making use of them? How do you get benefit out of them? And I know you've got some really interesting stories about Hurricane Irma and how you kind of use those partnerships. Maybe you can walk us through that a little bit.
Sure. Irma, as you know, we haven't had a major hurricane in Florida since Wilma back in 2005, I believe. So it's been a while. So we knew that people, it's human nature. People are not, on top of the things like we do in law enforcement or in the emergency management field. So it was in and on itself, it was a challenge to have people ready. But one thing that thankfully happened after Wilma is that our private partners, which in the case of South Florida is the power company, they they um, they did a fantastic job improving in their infrastructure. So just to give an example, personally, my house in Miami didn't have power for like 10 days with Wilma. Yet with Irma, I didn't have power for 5 days, and Irma stayed with us for almost 24 hours. So maybe it was not as as um as a potent hurricane like a Cat 3 with Wilma, but the fact that it stayed on top of the region for so long, it really did a job on the vegetation of South Florida. So the debris that was around the region was outrageous. I mean, millions of cubic yards of debris. So so with Irma, thankfully, I mm, knew that there was an established relationship with FPNL in the city. So so that helped us maintain that communication open. Even our own elected official, our own mayor, was able to pick up the phone, and he received phone calls from the government affairs from the power company to make sure that the areas would get the power restored. So again, you use that relationship in place, and I understand that some agencies, some cities are larger, so it's harder to have that communication. But it's a goal that everybody should have in mind, no matter how small or how big you are. The importance of having that public-private partnership in place is super important. And again, having the way the EOCs work is that you have communication and you have representatives from the power companies sitting in those EOCs, so you can pick up the phone and call them and say, listen, we have an area of vulnerable people that haven't had power for 5, 6 days, so we need to restore power immediately or as soon as possible. So you need the leverage of that's already in place from, let's say, for example, an elected official that has already called and has requested that, and the leverage that you have from knowing these representatives during the time that we call blue sky, and being on top of that request. So it's like a 1-2 punch. I would like to say. So those are things that again, there's no way to have this the day of the emergency. If there's no time, that's something that at least in Florida, I have 6 months out of the year to be able to either establish that relationship, strengthen it, or are even, making it even better. So, for example, with the power company, we have them coming over. We had a meeting with, government affairs and the person that would be sitting in the divisional emergency operations center, and we learned how they work. We were being invited, as a matter of fact, to go to the opening of their EOC. They're going to have a brand new EOC opening soon, and so it's always good to have that communication line open both ways. And of course, at the end of the day, everybody wants to serve the best they can, even if the private sector. And let me, give you the example of Walmart. Most, big cities and areas have a Walmart in place, and they're the first ones that want to have the road clear so people can keep, go back again and do business with Walmart or with any of the businesses in your area. So that's something that everybody wants, to be able to bounce back as soon as possible. And yeah, maybe the cities are not going to be exactly the same as before, depending on the level of the impact of a hurricane. But you always want to at least go back to normal as you can, and you need the private sector to help you accomplish that. So I know that our slides, I'm not sure if they're still you're not able to show them, but I put examples of communications that I use from the private sector prior to Irma. So I retweeted the message that the power company was putting out, or where to call if your power is out. I put, for example, uh, tweets from Comcast and on how they were providing, Wi-Fi in certain areas for free, and I even use a great application called Gas Buddy to let people know, download this application, and they'll be able to find out where to find gas. So as in everything, you have to have, this big picture, use everything that you can think of, be as flexible as you can, and share information. Even though, of course, this is not government information, but you need that information to help the ones that follow you on your social media, or that probably are listening to an interview that an elected official has given out, and share that information as much as you can. So in other words, we not only give out information pertaining to the city itself. We like to, retweet stuff from the public, from the private sector as well. So
that's great. And we actually sorry, Natalie, we are able to show the slide. So the slide I have up here is the one you were just talking about with Gas Buddy and the retweet from Comcast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that type of information, we started giving out information 10 days before Irma came. I mean, specific information, because we always see, starting June 1st, we have fairs, we have, our partners in the media start telling people, to be prepared for hurricanes. But then we really push the message. We started pushing the message the 10 days before Irma hit, and we took advantage of Labor Day weekend to tell people, hey, if you're gonna go to your grocery store to buy burgers for your barbecue, make sure you buy extra food, extra water. So that's the type of thing we always, maintain as far as our public message. So on the next slide, you're gonna see the roads in our city, how much they got flooded the day after Irma passed our area. So again, this is very important, because some of the people knew exactly, where that building is, and we tweeted this out, so people, oh, I won't be able to go to my building tomorrow probably because the roads are this flooded. So on the next slide, we'll see our elected officials actually on the ground with the power company crew. So showing, that we don't. I mean, if in situations like this, it's all hands on deck. From the mayor of the city down to the employee that just got on board. Everybody is involved in in response and recovery. On our next slide, you'll see city employees and elected officials. What we decided to do as well, and this is great because this, as a matter of fact, this was also brought up today during the Miami-Dade County meeting, the after action report, is that social media became, a major safe line because many people didn't have television, didn't have cable, and we all know that few people have radios as it is. Um, so we use a lot of social media to keep the public informed. But we knew that many people may not have even a smartphone, or not interested in social media at all. So we use another tool on the box. We went back to the 19th century, and we just printed a page with information on how to call FEMA, how to get a permit if your house got damaged, or the fence was knocked down by the winds, or a tree fell on top of your house. So we actually went to what we knew where we're going to have traffic areas, like in a mall or in front of the Sam's Club, like you see in this slide. And we actually gave out papers with the information, both in English and Spanish, and to keep the people involved and informed on the best steps to recover from Irma. On the next slide, will you see this is something that was already in place. The Salvation Army came over to help us with feeding the personnel, police departments, public works, and I love this picture, especially the one on the right. I don't know if you can see it. Let me know if you see police officers in front of the Salvation Army truck. But anyway, the Salvation Army has FedEx, the FedEx logo next to them. That shows that the private sector is partnering with an NGO like the Salvation Army, or a community organization like the Salvation Army, to help them do their job, because probably the truck that they use to give out the food, that's expensive. So maybe they got a contribution or from FedEx to be able to do what they know best, which is provide this type of service. So again, this didn't happen the day of Irma. Obviously, this happened with time. So that's when I say that blue skies are so important, especially in areas like South Florida, where you create this type of partnerships ahead of time. Actually, I was thinking this morning, Florida, the South Florida region just opened more trains, because, as you know, Florida regretfully has a bad reputation. We're becoming another Los Angeles, with the traffic situation and the amount of people that has moved to South Florida. So what do you do in the case of an evacuation? So how you move so many hundreds of thousands of people all within 3, 4, 5 days, without having them being stuck in the middle of the state. So we have to brainstorm the new ways of mobilizing so many people. So why don't use trains? We have the public trains like Amtrak, and we have now private trains. So that type of partnership, we might have to think about that in the future. If if God forbids another big hurricane comes our way, and we were lucky. Irma was just a Cat 1, and but it hit the Keys as almost a Cat 4. So it's Category 4 hurricanes they create havoc. They destroy your home. They kill people. So it's always it's always we always have to keep our thinking cap on, even though we don't have a hurricane coming our way tomorrow. But you need to have that conversation and be part of committees that do the thinking and bringing up ideas, so that the powers that be can actually put those partnerships in place if you don't have the third event, but other people may have it. On the next slide, I'm showing three things um, that we have done at the state level and also at the local level. Um, at the state level, Florida um, has a contract with a private company called Everbridge to do alerts. So in case, let's say, there's a tornado, your phone will receive a notification. And I know that a lot of Apple phones and Android phones may have that notification, but this is more specific. This allows us to give more specific instructions, and just not tornado warning. For us, that's not enough. You have to give more better steps, better instructions for the people on what to do. And we did this because we have a very transient population, a lot of tourists that come from all over the world, and even people that have lived here for 10 years have never experienced a hurricane. So, or let alone a tornado. So the fact that you can give a little more instruction to those people help us in saving lives and property. So Doral Alerts was created based on that partnership that contract that the state has with the private sector company. So they gave the municipalities across the state the opportunity to piggyback on this and create our own alert system and saving taxpayers money. So we do that alerts for mainly emergency situations. It could be something maybe as small as a gas leak, but we use it and we can create a geofence and just alert the people that are within a mile radius that may be affected by a gas leak. So that type of alert system that again was created by a private company helps us in government tremendously. There's also Intelligent, which is an application. This is actually an application for your smartphone that does basically the same thing. The Doral Alert system, it's a little wider in the sense that we can make phone calls to yellow pages or white pages, and it's we can the reach is a little broader. The person has to download the application on their phone. And on the right, this is a partnership that we already have in place with National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center and NOAA, in the sense that they help cities and counties become storm ready. So they come to your area, they do an assessment of what you do when weather systems or weather emergencies strikes, and they give you that accreditation that you are a storm ready city or county. So Doral became that about 3 years ago, and you have to renew it every 2 or 3 years. So that's a great partnership that we have with at the federal level as well. As I was saying at the beginning, is you cannot do it alone. You have to reach out to your county, your state, your federal levels, you know, the health departments, everybody. So I don't know if we have time to talk about Zika, but do let me know.
So that's great. This story about Irma is so robust and has so many pieces to it. And I think we actually are running out of time, and we may not have time to talk about Zika. I'm thinking actually, what would be really interesting for our audience would be if we move forward to the very last slide, because I know you have a great story about using social media archiving during and after and before the storm and how it helped you with FEMA. So I'd love to hear you tell that, and then leave a little bit of time for questions.
Beautiful. Yes. Your agency, like mine, probably in charge of coming up with putting together the after action report, which is something that Doral Police had to do few days or weeks after Irma. And the after action report helps in to evaluate how we did it, what we did well, our strengths, our weaknesses, and the steps that you need to make it better if you were struck by a hurricane in the future. So part of that after action report, which is many inches, trust me, it was pretty thick, was to put together the public information aspect of the preparation, response, and the recovery aspect of Irma. So what I needed to put, basically, how many all the posts that we put on social media, the press releases that went out, and we do this obviously in conjunction with our public affairs department at the city. But when you go into your Twitter account, if you try to print every single tweet that you put out in 2 or 3 weeks, you're printing a lot of pages, and that they only have like 2 tweets or 3 tweets max. That's it. The rest is your banner on the top, your column on the left, and that's the same, the same image that you're going to have page after page after page. So what I love about having this type of system is that in one page you can have up to, I believe, 10 or 12 summarize the tweets that you posted online, and with the text, everything that you put, your photograph, the time, the date, but instead of using 3 tweets per page and printing a lot of stuff that you don't need, you have 12 per page, and you can do a compendium of everything that you did as a PIO, and have a record of it, which is in Florida super important because, as you know, we have the Sunshine Law. So if in the future, whether it's the media or anybody, they don't even have to live in Florida. Anybody in the world wants to know, okay, we want to know if you guys did your diligence in putting out information prior to Irma. You can go into this type of systems, print your all the tweets that you put out, and fulfill your public record request, and be compliant with your state law. So, and again, this is important because today if I try today, for example, to find a tweet from a year ago, trust me, you're going to waste a lot of time, and you're going to be scrolling forever, and chances are you won't find it because maybe Twitter just go back certain amount of tweets, and you won't be able to access the tweet that you're looking for from a year ago. So having systems like this are super important, and not only from the emergency management after action report aspect of this, but also to be able to give me the opportunity to fulfill any public record requests that may come my way.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Natalie, and thank you so much for joining us today. This has been fantastic. I feel like you just had some great points about, why developing partnerships is important, especially for PIOs, and especially during that blue skies time, in advance of crisis situations. That story about Irma was great with all those examples, and just really powerful stories in general. Really great example of how much better your communication can be once we have those types of strategies and strategic allies in place. So really appreciate you joining us. And what I want to do now is try and squeeze in some questions and answers in the 10 minutes we have left. So I want to encourage everyone on the call right now to just take the next minute or so, put your questions in the side, and then what we'll do is we'll give Natalie a second to catch her breath, and then I'm going to ask her some of the questions that have come in. So go ahead, if you have questions right now, put them in. And while she's catching her breath, I just want to take a second to build on what she talked about at the end with regards to records requests and social media archiving. Not to belabor the point, but if you are a public agency, you are undoubtedly using social media as part of your communication strategy. And if you're like a lot of our customers, it's becoming more and more mission critical just in terms of posting crime tips and posting messages during emergencies, and all of that's a really fantastic benefit. But then on the flip side of that, when you're using social media as a public agency, you're facing a lot of risk in terms of being able to retain and produce your records. And, oftentimes we're finding social media records get deleted or edited, and it's really important to have a plan to be able to produce your records. And the good news is that that's a really easy problem to fix. And so that's why I want to take a moment to highlight the benefits of social media archiving, which if you're not already archiving, I'm sure a lot of you are, include, being in compliance with your state's public records laws, being able to use social media without the fear of being out of compliance, and then just the peace of mind you get from joining over 1,000 agencies like Natalie's, like the Doral PD in the city of Doral, who are using social media archiving to ensure that they can produce their Twitter and Facebook records if they're asked. So if you're curious, you can go to our website, archivesocial.com, and you can actually try Archive Social for free. It just takes 60 seconds to get set up. You can connect your Twitter account, and you can take a peek at what your actual archive looks like. So we encourage you to do that after the webinar. And then one last thing we want to say, everybody who has signed up for this webinar today is going to be added to our invite list for future webinars. We do have 2 great webinars coming up. One is on April 18th, and the topic will be creating a social media policy for 2018. And the next one after that is going to be in May with a guest named Mary McGuire. She is going to teach us some social media graphic design tips for non-graphic designers, which I know a lot of us are. So with that, now that Natalie's had a chance to take her breath and hopefully get a drink of water, let's get to some questions. So I think the first question we have that's come in says, do you think from a small agency of less than 15 people's perspective that PIOs are of importance to have on standby? And are there any schools I could send my officers to for training?
That's a great question, and we know that sometimes budgeting issues and limitations on resources and capabilities, make us have very flexible brains and minds on how to fulfill those needs. I highly recommend that PIOs. The thing is that a PIO really needs to have their pulse on their community, and I know that a lot of people can only afford to have a part-timer or maybe a consultant, but the important thing is to be able to be on top of it, to make sure that person keeps their eyes open and their ears open on what's going on, and not bring somebody totally from another world into your reality. So yes, the ideal is to have somebody within your agency to fulfill that role. That person probably won't need to do it 100% of the time, full time, but if you can have a part-timer that does something else, that's always very beneficial. And as far as training, I am a 120% supporter of free FEMA training. And FEMA, you can visit their page, and they have online training specifically for PIOs, and that they're free of charge. So what we have in Florida is you can do a lot of this online on the FEMA page. They have the link, and you even get a certification from the Department of Homeland Security for specifically for PIOs. And you can also have some of those courses need to be you need to go in person. And here in South Florida, we have had them regionally, so you don't have to fly to travel too far. And again, they're at no charge. So take advantage of those resources that are already in place, and it will help you with your budget, and it will help increase your resources, your human resources capabilities.
Okay, great. I know you're a big fan of those FEMA resources, and
yes,
we can share the link to some of those resources with everybody after the webinar is over.
Correct. Perfect.
And great. So another question we have is, Natalie, do you have a crisis communications plan, and is it something that you'd be willing to share with the people on the webinar today?
I have a plan. It's very basic. Sometimes, even though it's public record, sometimes you would have to obviously tweak it and make it applicable to your area. I'm not, it's not that I've been doing this for many years, but in my experience, I think it's always good to not to start from scratch when it comes to your own planning. But a lot of people, believe it or not, they just copy paste and just change the name of the agency. I'm not a believer of that. I think that you have to really know your inside out, your policies in your agency, the way things are done, your procedures, everything that's done in your agency in a specific way, and then use somebody else's as a basis. But it's always good to do it from your end first, and then. But I'll be super happy to share, my what we do here as far as a crisis plan. I would have to ask the city though, because most of it comes from the city administration. But I'll happily will be able to share some of those procedures that we have in place. And it's
That would be
very
great.
simple.
And
Yeah, it's very simple because it's basically knowing your communication line and making sure that everybody's in place where they're supposed to be. It's not hundreds of pages, thankfully. I mean, yes, the comprehensive emergency management plan is super long, and most agencies have long plans because you cover everything, every type of emergency, not only natural, but terrorist attacks and urban upheaval, and anything that you can even imagine that your area may be at risk, and different levels of risk. But when it comes to communications, it's pretty much a simple plan, you know depending also on the type of emergency, but it for sure is something that it could be applicable to all size of agencies and organizations.
okay, great. And then I know another thing that we wanted to squeeze in today and we didn't really get to talk about was the topic of, creating memos of understanding. And I know you have a great template for that. So while we didn't get to touch on it today during the webinar, we will share that with everybody
Okay.
today after the call.
Fantastic.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I think we have time for, great, one last question. And that question is, with regards to the media coalition that you mentioned earlier on in the webinar, who organizes and runs that?
That's a great question. As a matter of fact, what I love to talk about this is the fact that it started with one PIO and it's super successful. But this one PIO knew a lot of people in the media because that person came from the media world, and it's actually out from Broward. Broward is our county north of us, where actually the tragedy at Parkland took place. So it's basically three counties that 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 have this media coalition. It's Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County. So this one PIO started it, putting together. He was very known in the area because again he came from the news media, and that helped spread the word, and he kept sending emails inviting people. He would invite reporters that everybody knows from the different television stations or radio stations, and you find people there from all walks of life. You find that when we go to these coalitions, you find people from the hospital field, especially during the Zika time, and we find people from different government levels, from even the Coast Guard can show up sometimes. So it's it might sound difficult, but the example of this one PIO putting this together, it's of course has to do with a lot of love for what you do, because I'm sure he puts a lot of extra time into this. But I'm telling you, it has been very beneficial for the rest of the region to have something like that in place.
That's great. I love that it just got started from one PIO. It shows that,
One PIO.
that anybody with an idea can get that started.
And I will share their Twitter
up.
account. I will share the Twitter account with you so you guys can take a look at it as well.
Perfect. Sounds like we have a lot of great resources to share after that. So very cool.
Yes.
Well, yeah, we're coming up to the end of the hour. So we had a ton of great questions, and we're not able to get through them all today. But I will send out a follow-up email in the next day or two, which will have a link to this webinar recording, and you're welcome to share it with other people at your agency if that's something you want to do. And then finally, I just want to say thank you to Natalie just one more time for a fantastic conversation. Natalie, we really appreciate it. Great job today.
My pleasure. It's been wonderful, and the whole process from the first time you called me till, which was many months ago, till now, it's been fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, we really appreciate you too, and thanks everyone for attending. And we will get that follow-up email out soon. and we hope to see you at another webinar soon. Thanks.